Broughan, 10 minutes.
I'm delighted on Europe Day to contribute briefly to this important debate. And clearly the European Union is facing major challenges over the next few years, and the decision of the British people to opt for Brexit has offered, of course, an existential challenge to the EU's very existence. In virtually every EU country, of course, there have been ongoing and long-standing concerns about the level of democracy, accountability and transparency in the EU's quasi-federal structures. These concerns have often been too easily dismissed as populism by commentators who, of course, are devoted to the EU project. The conduct of the bailouts of Euro members like Ireland, Greece and Portugal since 2010 have greatly exacerbated those misgivings and reservations among the European electorates. I notice, Cathaoirleach, that the great Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek finance minister, is now forming his own Europe-wide political party, which maybe we'll see in Ireland also. Brexit, of course, was a striking response to these concerns, but wide sections of European opinion, of EU opinion, of course, have felt similar worries and concerns and even revulsion at the treatment of the smaller Euro member states. So rather than deeply examining how these concerns may be addressed in future revisions of the EU treaties, many analysts and journalists simply condemn the fears of the European peoples and label representatives as populist, including those, of course, who genuinely want a much more democratic European Union, and I would be one of those, Cathaoirleach. At a recent meeting of the Budgetary Oversight Committee with members of the European Parliament, deputies tried hard to show our European parliamentarians how close the relationship is between Ireland and the UK on personal, our own relations, cultural, social, economic and political grounds. Above all, we emphasised the critical joint responsibility of the Irish and British states for the Good Friday Agreement. At that meeting also we discussed the proposals for the EU's multi-annual financial framework budget and the likely consequences for Ireland's EU contribution, which is set to reach €3 billion per annum in 2019. Many other EU countries, of course, are currently also grappling with challenges produced by issues like the migration crisis, slow economic growth and climate change, which other speakers have referred to. Ireland indeed has to contend not only with working hard to achieve the least damaging result on Brexit, but also on how to respond to the proposals of President Emmanuel Macron. President Macron's vision on the future of the EU is clearly a programme for a federal structure, for a federation. In his book Revolution, or I suppose Révolution, and his Sorbonne speech of September 2017, Macron outlines how he wishes to transfer the sovereignty of the French Republic, the historic French Republic from 1789, to a new Republic of Europe, and especially led by France and Germany. He writes that, and I quote, "Faced with the current serious challenges, it would simply be an illusion and a mistake to propose to rebuild everything at the national level," end quote. He goes on to say that, quote, "Faced with an influx of migrants, the international terrorist threat, climate change, the digital transition, as well as the economic supremacy of the Americans and the Chinese, European is the most appropriate level at which to take action," end quote. So Macron envisages the end of European nations holding their own sovereignty. In practical terms, Macron's new European constitution will include an EU finance minister and a shared EU national, or perhaps we will start calling it continental debt. Many people would have felt, of course, having launched the euro without, in fact, an all-European debt structure was crazy economics, Cathaoirleach. It will certainly involve a common consolidated corporate taxation, the CCTT base, including clearly pan-European rules on corporation tax and the European-wide digital tax. Macron also envisages a great deepening of the current PESCO arrangements, which the Dáil recently approved, and 45 of us voted against that, and the creation, of course, of a European Defence Force, a European army. The President of France seems to want these new structures put in place and a clear path to European sovereignty by 2024, the date of the European Parliament elections after next. Obviously, Macron's vision depends on German support to remotely go down this pathway to a federal state. But he seems to accept that an inevitable consequence of this federalist programme will be a multi-speed European Union. A number of states, perhaps including Germany, may join France on a federalist road, but other states, although continuing in the European Union, will almost certainly remain outside that core group. Macron's anti-worker initiatives in France do much, of course, to undermine his federalist vision, since his domestic policy seems clearly to further undermine the Social Europe programme, and which Deputy Howland spoke of so powerfully there a few minutes ago. And that Social Europe, of course, was such an attractive feature culture of the European Union for the first 30 years or so of our membership. It may well be, therefore, that we are heading for a multi-speed European Union with member states in different orbits around states which want a federal structure. There's always been the issue of deepening or widening, and again, Deputy Howland referred to all that, the ante-room, the waiting list of states like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Macedonia, the former Yugoslav Republic, Georgia, indeed, Armenia, Ukraine, and even perhaps down the road some stage Turkey and Russia. The very best outcome for Ireland, of course, regarding Brexit is that the UK would also be one of those states. Clearly, the UK, it would be orbiting still in the European system. Clearly, the UK will continue to be deeply involved with the EU in areas like security, policing and scientific research. Despite the appalling performance of the current Tory Prime Minister and her appalling government, as evidenced again this morning, Cathaoirleach, at Prime Minister's questions, which I just glanced at before coming into the House, it's likely that the UK will end up in the customs union, or at least a customs union, as proposed, of course, by the distinguished representative Keir Starmer, MP of the UK Labour Party, whether before or after the next general election, because obviously these matters may have to be resolved by a UK general election. Ireland's critical economic needs and the issue of preventing any border returning in our country make an ongoing close relationship between Ireland and the UK imperative. Thus, when our own people may have to decide on whether to belong to President Macron's core if this programme was to go ahead, or to be a close confederal member of the future EU along the present lines, it will be in our interest, I believe, to support a multi-speed EU constitution. Europe's greatness, anyway, Cathaoirleach, lies in the differences and the unique cultures, all our wonderful languages and traditions of all our people, of all the European peoples, the 40 or 50 nations. And the EU's future evolution should always reflect that essential reality. I agree with commentators like Stephen Collins that the Irish government should definitely engage in a very constructive way with President Macron, but given our profound historical experience, I think his federal vision is anathema to many of our people. And in fact, we spent so long as part of the British Empire, of course. I think a lot of people wouldn't be attracted to joining a new Carolingian Empire, or a restoration of the Carolingian Empire, which encompassed, as you remember, Cathaoirleach, France, Germany and Italy. The most pressing realisation now, of course, is the growing size of Ireland's EU budget contribution. We're now one of only 9 net contributors to the EU budget, and we're entering our 5th year as a net contributor. The 2021-2026 EU budget has been set at 1.27 trillion, and the 27 remaining EU states, and this will now represent 1.11% of the EU GNI. I noticed former Deputy Hogan, Commissioner Hogan, he seemed to be looking for a 1.2% or even a 1.3%, as indeed some of the parliamentarians we met were looking for that type of figure. And Taoiseach Varadkar, of course, has signalled a willingness to support this budgetary programme, but many countries such as Austria, Netherlands and Denmark are opposed to Jean-Claude Juncker's proposal to breach the previously agreed EU budgetary cap of 1% of GNI. Of course, while the British are expected to go on paying into the European Union, and they will go on paying, Cathaoirleach, all down through the years if they don't rejoin, past 2021 for critical issues like passporting rights for the financial sector and the EU Open Skies policy. But the additional funding is needed to make up the estimated up to 12 billion deficit caused by the UK's departure in March next year. In 2018, of course, Ireland is paying an EU contribution of 2.7 billion, and we'll pay almost 2.9 billion in 2019. In fact, as you know, Minister, our contribution has just about doubled in the last 5 years since we've become a net contributor. So we're a very significant and important pillar now of the European Union, certainly in financial terms. The 2021-27, I should have said 2021-27 there earlier, EU budget includes, of course, a cut of 5% in the common agricultural policy spending, which will profoundly negatively impact on our farming sector. And this is something I noticed Minister Creed, he has met his, I think he met his French counterpart, didn't he, earlier this week in relation to this whole matter, because France has a similar view to ourselves. But Ireland's contribution and our growing net contribution to the EU budget must be kept under very close scrutiny in coming years, given that it's now becoming a bigger budget than the budget of many of our government departments. The MEPs we met on the Budget Committee recently, they told us, of course, how the EU's future budget deficit will be financed. I think it's at least by 2/3. The Minister probably have the exact figure, not by cuts but by new monies. payments, and some of the new money, of course, will be additional funding, like the custom duty that they will be asking us to supply. So I think that our Budget Committee and the whole Dáil, we need to keep these financial matters under close observation, as well as being supportive of the EU budget. I believe that despite the awful Tories who are in government at the moment in the UK, I hope and think that there will be a soft Brexit, Cathaoirleach, and that there won't be a border here. But I think we need to engage. We need to engage with the deep and profound thinking that's been done by people like President Macron about how this European Union will evolve. Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you very much.